our friends in the chat room. And today we have a Master Chair of Vistage International, Mr. Lance Descourouez. Lance has been a friend to our chairs in China. He has come over to China for many times and conducted training programs for our chairs in China. So he is, in a popular word, he is an old friend of our people, Chinese people. Okay. I don't need to say too much about Lance. Lance having been a chair for more than 20 years, and the best of practice chair and the master chair of Vistage. He has many, many wonderful stories to tell. Okay, so Lance, welcome.
谢谢. Sheldon, thank you. And the mere fact that you've invited me to speak, to share some of my experience is the kind of opportunity that I don't take lightly. It always feels interesting to me. I'm hearing your introduction when I first came to China in 1985, and I was only 25 years old at the time, and the time I had there, as with many, fundamentally changed my life. I grew up in the West and had traveled a fair amount, but I felt like I knew things until I visited China. And a country that has a history and a people that was so beyond anything I had ever truly contemplated, really had an impact and has set the tone in many ways for my desire to learn internationally, to gain cultural understanding, how it is that actual differences and similarities, but what brings people together and what divides them from a sense of their cultural orientation. It really began at that time. And for that reason, Sheldon, the mere fact that you're inviting me to share some of my experiences as a Vistage Chair and my tenure now, it feels almost full circle. So thank you for what you've given to me and allowing me the opportunity
You're welcome, Lance.
to give back. My orientation as a chair, if I can open with that particular story, it's not nearly as noble as I would say many of my chair colleagues. I'm 60 years old now. But I began, as you said, chairing a long time ago, or I was 38, and I had only been a CEO for 5 years. And that's not typically what we recommend. But here's the story. I was a CEO of a company that taught and developed executives, both U.S. and abroad, to live and work overseas, how to work with different countries. The company I ran not only provided rather elaborate, customized cross-cultural training for mostly Fortune 100 companies, but also within the diplomatic corps and in missionary, so both public and private sector. I knew that because our services were offered mostly to large companies, I was interested in developing what we call SMB, or the small to medium size. So I became a speaker to sell, if you will, our services within the tech or Vistage community well over almost 28 years ago now. And in the context of presenting to these various Vistage groups, I became friends, if you will, with the role of the chair. So the people who were the leaders of leaders, and I was fascinated by the work they were doing, which was different than my work. But as the story goes, I was a professional CEO. I wasn't a founder. And the company I was running was one that over a 3.5-year period, it doubled the size of the business. And I was excited by the opportunity, but I wasn't an equity shareholder. And when I approached the owners for equity, they told me that wasn't it was privately held in the family's plans. So no equity for me. And I admit that bothered me. And then less than 3 weeks later, while being sort of concerned about my future running this particular company, or feeling like, was I really aligned with the owners? I was spending so much time abroad. I was in Japan, actually, when my young son took his first steps. And the fact that I wasn't there personally affected me emotionally. Personally, it wasn't my image of who I wanted to be as a father, to miss certain events on behalf of growing a business that I was feeling a little disappointed in anyway. So literally 24 hours, 48 hours after that, hearing from my wife that my son had taken his first step, I was back in speaking to a Vistage group, and the chair asked me how I was feeling and how I thought about my company. And when I shared some of my frustration, he said, "Well, have you ever thought of becoming a Vistage Chair?" And I said, "Well, thank you. I thought about it a little, but I'm now very interested, although I'm relatively young compared to some of the chairs I've met." And he said, "Well, Lance, it's Silicon Valley. We are growing rapidly here in this part of Northern California. I think there might be an opportunity if you're interested." And admittedly, Sheldon, I thought, you know what? This sounds like it would be engaging or enjoyable, and I will learn from it. So I remember coming home that day and telling my wife the bold step. We had, as I mentioned, my son, and she was pregnant with our second child. I'm going to make the big, bold decision to leave the company that I was running, and they were paying me well, to begin practice in life as a Vistage Chair. And while I was scared, I was also excited. And I said, I will do it for 5 years. I will be around as my children, when they start school, I'll go seek out my next CEO position, or maybe even start my own venture. Sheldon, as you say, that was over 20 years ago. So clearly this is something that I never anticipated would become a career, or become, said even more so, a calling. It truly is a gift of a lifetime. I say to many, I feel like I retired that day. The phrase that whenever you do something that you would all but pay others to do, or it feels like it gives you so much that it's not work, almost overnight, that was my experience. Having said that, I'll admit to struggling in the beginning, being a bit intimidated by executives who were far more experienced than I was, far more seasoned. And I realized early that perhaps I wouldn't be a very successful chair, because I was in my head as being less than. And you mentioned prior to us sort of beginning the taping that I should share a story. There is one story for me as a new chair building a group that really stood out for me, and it's the following. As I mentioned, 6 months into trying and focusing on building a group together and approaching CEOs of large companies and more experience, and feeling I was an imposter, or I was not good enough, so to speak. And I remember interviewing one particular candidate who was 62 years old, and he had already built and sold 2 businesses, and he was on his 3rd. And as I say, I'm interviewing him to be a participant in one of these peer groups where we share candidly. I got halfway through the interview with him, and I felt I was not authentic, and I paused. I said, his name is Mike. Yeah. Mike Smith. Mike, I need to apologize. I feel like I don't really know what I'm doing here. I said, Mike, you are a very seasoned executive. You know so much about business, more than I feel I may ever know. And I'm feeling awkward that I'm sort of here as your Vistage Chair, your CEO. I didn't say CEO coach at the time. That's not weird, but your CEO leader. And he said something I'll never forget. He paused and he put his hand on my arm and he said, you know, Lance, you're right. I'm seeing a few things and I've learned a few things. He said, if Vistage is anything like the way you describe it, it's not your answers, but it's ours. That interests me. Good. He said, Lance, you are somebody who I would say has what I call soft eyes. He said, you clearly care. And I have to say, I really enjoy the questions you're asking me. And then he also smiled and he said, you know, Lance, I think when you know more about my business than I do, we're probably both in trouble. But what I loved about that story, I realized in that moment, I would never be the smartest chair, the most seasoned, the most capable, but I could be the chair that cared more than any other chair. And if there's one thing that I feel I'm committed to is that I will care about my members if there's a competition more than any other chair. And that has stood by me as a tenant, if you will, or a principle that has made the difference, I feel, in my life as a chair. Mm-hmm. It's probably one of the reasons that I was invited by Vistage to serve as a mentor to other chairs early on. I had only been a chair for 5 years before they began asking me to train not only chairs in the U.S., but in China, as you know, and Malaysia and Argentina and Germany and Mexico and the UK and now, 18 of the 25 countries we've been in, they've asked me specifically to have a role, and one that I'm very honored to have taken part. And I have to say the theme has only been one thing, and that's to care so much about my members. There's a phrase we sometimes use, and yes, sir.
Yes, one point. You mentioned that this potential member, right, said that I feel that you have a soft eye, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Did he tell you anything about how he read that kind of soft eye?
In his words, because I asked him more about what that meant. Yeah. He said, you can tell the truth about somebody by the way they show it in their eyes. Okay. In his words, you can tell the truth about somebody about the way they carry it. He said, hard eyes are looking past you at their own plans or their own interests. Soft eyes are looking with you. Okay. And that's how he described it. And it's not a phrase I had heard before, but the moment he described the image, I admit I shared the experience.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. That's the first time I have heard about a soft eye.
Okay. I would say another concept that relates to that for me that was interesting. It reminded me of an early experience I had in the Middle East, where in a country where we stand very close together, where they would say you read someone's eyes as a window to their soul.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Liz. Yeah.
So part of what you and I were going to discuss was a bit about my 20 years of chairing. And it feels difficult in some 10 to 15 minutes, put that into words, but I guess I would highlight three things that stand out for me. Very often as a chair in my practice, people have asked me why I'm doing this, or why not become a CEO, or why not do something else. And I've really realized that the reason I have continued to keep in this work is, as I say, three things. The first is at the core of my experience, having traveled my life and watching what truly makes a difference in the world, while choosing not to take anything away from governments and the role government plays in the life of communities and nation states. But I've been absolutely fascinated by what it means when a business will create an opportunity for a job. I've watched a job save somebody from prison. I've watched a job change somebody's life for better health, better wealth. I've watched businesses create work in ways that fundamentally can change everything. And I saw myself moving out of, let's say, the world of training in and of itself, or the world of consulting or research, into participating with businesses that sought to grow. And when you grow, you create community. When you grow, you create change and research and products and technology. And so if I could be part of, number one, helping business grow, I knew that way I was contributing to the world. The second thing about being a Vistage Chair was just that. I'm in a privileged place with business owners who are contemplating the type of change they want to make in the world. My voice matters. If I'm in a role with a company that is considering to invest in a new way to save lives, or to invest in a philanthropy that will save communities, or will all of a sudden my effort to, quote, change the world, every single day I was creating community that was about not only growing companies, but changing the world. And I say one community at a time, one person at a time. And then the last one, and this one's fascinating to me, I never anticipated how much, let's just say, generational behaviors could be changed by a single individual. Let me talk about that last one for a minute. As you know, the U.S. is not nearly as big as China, or nearly as old. But in the U.S., one of the things that I've seen is how patterns of generational behavior are passed through families and organizations. If there's a history of abuse, if there's a history of alcoholism, if there's a history of anything, and I'm working with the individual, I have an opportunity to stop that generational behavior. Okay, let me use an example.
Yeah.
There's one of the companies that I feel fortunate to work with, and it's quite literally 5 generations.
Oh.
They're relatively famous. They build what they call struts. So under any car, there's something that it holds up, balances with the struts that hold it up. And this family business is famous for building the struts that went under the Queen of England's very chariot, or her famous the palace, what do you call it, horse-drawn carriage. Anyway, 5 generations, family business, struts. one of the patterns, if you will, within the family was one of both the two I mentioned, alcoholism, but sort of this driven success at the expense of family relationships. At the in an effort to ensure the business passed on to the next generation, there was a level of pain, let's just say. And the CEO of the company, I had an opportunity, who had just was in the early stage of transitioning the company, generation number 5, from his father. Early on in my work with him, because I had a chance to meet his father and him, I pointed out something I thought I was seeing as a particular pattern of behavior. And I asked in a very gentle way, where did that have its origin? And he didn't, without missing a beat, referenced his father and then his father's father. And in the work we do as chairs, I asked him if that will continue. As he planned to pass that on. I knew his college-age children, and we were going to be talking about their future. In any case, what I want to share with you, Sheldon, he had said to me that he knew a pain he didn't want to continue, and he knew that he had already begun a pattern, and that, in his words, I'm not a fan of therapy or psychologists, so what are you asking, Lance? And I said to him, it's my belief we live in the world we create or we accept. What's the world you want to create? Or said another way, is this a legacy you want to continue? And I'll never forget, without any judgment, I simply was in partnership. He said, Lance, I need your help, but it stops here. And the sense of pride I have, there's a whole other aspect, but they are now moving into generation 6. And ironically, there's 4 children in the family. There's 1 daughter. And for the first time in the family history, there's a woman who is leading the business. And he said to me, this goes back about 5 months ago, but he said, he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, Lance, I want to thank you. I know if you and I hadn't begun our working relationship about the legacy I wanted, my daughter would not be the leader of the company now because of my own blind spots, my own legacy of passing on history of pain. So the 3 things: to grow companies, to change the world, and to stop or create generational change. If you had told me those are 3 things I'd get to do, I never would have thought it possible. With your permission, I'd like to share one other story that, again, is, I feel like in many ways I'm talking to this sort of gift of a lifetime that very few people get to participate in. It's the following. There was a business that I was introduced to that was in the agricultural space, and they are relatively famous in the United States for creating certain new, if you will, products that have sort of changed the U.S. domestic market. So they created something called broccolini, broccoli and asparagus, and they combine it's unique, but it took off. And the other one, what they call sugar snap peas. And there's several things that they are famous for creating that have changed sort of the American diet over the family history. And the company is 3 generations old, and I met it at the 2nd generation. In any case, I was approached, interestingly enough, because I mentioned to you I was younger. The CEO of the company, the 2nd generation, was transitioning to his son, who was only 35 years old. It was a business that was fairly sizable at the time, but economically was in a very poor situation. and the father had chosen to step away because he felt like he was failing. And so he was transitioning it to his young son, who had more experience, let's say, in sales. But as they say, he was only 35. And because I was young, we sort of had an more, he felt more connected to me than he might others. In any case, he and I built a fast friendship relationship, but the business was really economically challenged, underwater, and they had to take on debt and a partnership to save the business. And I say with pride, working with this 35-year-old CEO, in less than 5 years, he completely turned the business around, leaning on the Vistage Group to make bold moves, big decisions, redefining the leadership team. And I felt very, very happy that I played a part in this turnaround. Story's not done. So that was when I began as a chair, and I mentioned 5 years in. The sad part of the story is when his name was Jeff turned 40, unbeknownst to any of us, he had a bad heart, and he died at the age of 40 from a heart condition that no one knew existed. Sorry. And I received a phone call from his wife. They were on a holiday together, in tears and a panic, and Lance, I don't know who else to call. The company's at risk. I'm going to need help. Joe's relationship with his father is not good at present, even though he's the board member, but they both know you, they trust you. So, I became very close with Jeff's father, and he relied on me. He said, I don't know much about Vistage, but I know what it's done for the company and my son. In addition, Sheldon, this amazed me, the Vistage members created a tiger team, a separate team that worked for almost 2 years for Jeff's wife, helping her through. There were many challenges just in terms of the insurance and her children and their safety. So A, we're taking care of Jeff's wife. B, I began working with Jeff's father, who said to me, may I take Jeff's seat at the table? And so for the next 2 years, he and I and the Vistage Group worked while he brought in the first non-family member CEO, and they began to regrow the business. Okay. Jeff's father, Victor, when Victor passed the reins to the first non-family member, the intention was there would be some time overlap. 2 months later, Victor died of a similar heart condition to his sons, and again, no one knew it.
Oh, sad.
The other thing I would say, though, before he passed away, because he lost his son, he told me how much having our one-to-ones helped him learn things about his son he didn't know, feel a sense of connection. He said, Lance, I have a psychologist to go to and a priest. I find more connection with you. He passed away. Now the non-family member, his eldest daughter, who never intended being in the business, all of a sudden she is responsible for a $500 million business. And she reached out to me and said, you and I don't know each other well. We've met at many family events, and my family has trusted you. Now I'm in a difficult spot. There's some political infighting between the other owners, and I've never run a company this size, and I don't know that I want to. There's another person. The long and short of it is, she and I worked together for the next 10 years. And last year, this is now 20 years, that company sold for $750,000, $1 million. Yeah. The sense of pride I have to be able to achieve those three things that I mentioned in one business, family generation, creating sort of a future, helping overturn not just time, but the death of family members. Again, I can't describe the intimacy, and that's the right word, the privilege that a Vistage Chair has to experience the realities of what it means to keep a business afloat, to keep a family together, and to quite literally change the world. And what I mean by changing the world, these are people who created products, vegetables that hadn't existed. That doesn't even take you into the AI companies I'm working with, or the SaaS companies, or I live in Silicon Valley, and I watch every day companies create solutions that have never been thought of or dreamed of. And I have a place to have these private conversations to help people survive with board changes and economic downturns. And even today, in the midst of questions about climate change and COVID, I've never felt more needed, more necessary. And the fact that it's not me, it's a community of leaders committed as leaders to support each other through success and failure, openness, transparency, candor, and most of all, caring. That the foundation of my groups comes from that caring I mentioned. And when people care, you create excellence, you create meaning, exactly. You create purpose. So
exactly, yeah. One point.
Yes.
Yes. Very. I would say excellent example of how your members, right, show the care one another, and they for such a long period of time, right, they support this business and finally help them, right, grow to be the size and solve for the value, right? And what are the most difficult points during that long process, more than 10 years, right, from son to father and father to daughter, right? And the family also faced difficult challenges from other private business owners, right? Yeah. And can you mention a few points as most challenging, the things that you help to smooth over?
Yes, I would say, Sheldon, there's two things, maybe three, but I realize that caring contributes to creating a foundation of trust.
Yeah.
But the word trust itself, trust is something that's not realized until I give it. I don't have trust until I give it. So the reality is, in all of these situations, it was about creating a trust between myself and the individual. Each one of those family members or business owners, or we had to create a level of trust. And here's the most, to get to awareness. The most interesting thing for me, even in a single family, is how so often perception becomes the problem.
Yeah.
The daughter who feels the father doesn't believe in this, or the business owner who believes as if the business won't survive, or there's only one way to survive. I'm fascinated by the level with which self-awareness becomes the cornerstone for growth or change. So
there's self-awareness less.
Yes.
Okay. So you actually arose their self-awareness.
that all change, all humility, all growth comes from that sense of self-awareness. There was somebody who used a description for me. He said, if I'm asleep in my bed with my partner, and my partner, my wife, rolls over and in her sleep accidentally hits me in the face, I don't address her with anger. I know she's asleep. He said to me, Lance, have you noticed that all of us hurt others in our asleepedness? That my job as a human being is simply to become more awake, or using our words, more aware, more self-aware.
Right.
So in each one of the stories that I would share with you are stories of self-awareness.
Right.
Stories of what I thought was the truth. There are very few truths, right? The earth is round, the sun comes up. That's the truth. That's not a belief.
Right.
But everything else is a belief. Whether will be a good chair. Yeah. So my job is to create enough foundation of truth to create as awareness. And through awareness, I've watched people change everything. Their history, the generational, their companies, their opportunities, their future. Only if the self-awareness becomes the goal. What is a belief? What is a self-limiting belief? You get the idea. That for me has been the how do I word it? Oh yeah, when I pursue or seek out a new CEO to work with, I use the phrase, you've heard it, I approach CEOs, but human beings show up. that beneath the title is a human being who is either awake or not, or in the process of awakening. My job is to build our trust so that I can provide that through the group experience, the peer group, other people who care about each other.
Yeah. Good. Well, this is
Thank
a
you.
very, I would say, excellent example that how the members, led by your demonstration of care, right? They work together and they finally help out, right?
Exactly.
Right.
In my opinion, yes. Yeah. And the only other thing I would mention, back to self-awareness, we live in a world today with various aspects of media and social media, and you mentioned earlier some of my role globally. I've never ever felt more important in this role than I do today. As the world becomes smaller, being part of a community of chairs, all committed in service to the growth of their members around everything you and I have been talking about for the last 15 minutes. Again, 25 countries is not a lot of countries, but it's enough to say that the work we do is critical for the world we live in today, critical for the world we live in today, to get the truth around how we really can help each other come together to create healthy change.
Right. And to help leaders grow, right?
Absolutely.
To become better leaders.
Yep.
Okay. Well, now we have some time for questions. Our team has collected some interesting questions. I think some of them are very, relevant to your outstanding experience over the last 20 years. One of the questions that I would like to share with you is that one friend asked, could you share with us your successful cases? You already shared, right? And the experiences Vistage Chair guiding business leaders, or the one or two cases that impress you most. I guess the last example you mentioned already is one of them impress you most, right? And
Yes.
You have any additional one to share with us?
I would also what struck me with the question, what impressed you the most, is let me try an example. Let me use a story and then
you
build
have too
out.
many stories to tell.
I do. I'll share a judgment and then I met a particular candidate, somebody that was introduced as a possible person, and when I met him, I'll admit to some judgment on my part. He was 6'4". He was stood. He was a very, very big, strong. He wore cowboy boots, jeans, and when I met him, I was struck by the level of directness, and I knew he was quite intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
But the business he was running had only about, I would say, 40 employees and 8 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And they created a within the growth of the semiconductor world. There's what they call pedestals. So every disk, what do you call it? The silicon is placed on a pedestal and all the work. But that pedestal, that ceramic pedestal, when that breaks down or whatever, to replace it or repair it is very, very expensive. So he created a business that, if you will, was a spares company, could repair those. And anyway, I was sort of thought, well, it doesn't seem very exciting, and the business is small, and the 40 people he has. Sheldon, little did I know, the reason he was running an $8 million business is prior to that, he had grown one of the most successful businesses, not as a founder, but as a professional CEO, because he had never finished high school, but a little bit like a famous Einstein, quite literally. He was brilliant to the point he could solve technical problems. He had sort of insight into 5 different chemical physics, on and on and on. Anyway, he had run a business that was one of the largest in Silicon Valley, had well over 25,000 employees. He became tired of the experience there and had started his own business. I didn't know, okay, he already had 50 of his own patents. He in Korea, in Japan, and anyway, he as I began to get to know him, Sheldon, I realized I was at the foot of somebody who could quite literally change the world, and I'm excited to say, in the next 2 years, you and your listeners are going to hear about a worldwide solution he's created. And I was there then. My point is the other aspect of the people we get to work with are risk takers, are big thinkers. There is an experience of entrepreneurs who are invested literally in conceptually. What do they say about an artist? who sculpts and they don't sort of make the rock, they let the rock reveal. So the point I'm trying to make, what impresses me the most, and I have example after example of CEOs who've created things that have left the world changed forever, now and in the future. I literally, I'm so tempted to use these household names that your listeners would recognize, who are the pinnacle of Silicon Valley. And I had a role, I had an opportunity, but it's not about being near them. It's to recognize they were going to do that no matter what. There's an element of what happens when entrepreneurs are given the forum to create, to go. And the level with which they will take risks amazes me. And I admit, I care, as I told you, but I can't take the risks that some of these men and women take, and how much of a privilege it is, and how much we are dependent on their way at going at the world. So that's one story of he created a solution in the semiconductor world that involves connecting things that we never thought could be connected before. And once it starts from there, it will help the world and the climate and all of those things. So I'm excited. Yep.
Yeah, interesting. And
yes.
So in the very beginning, you were not aware of, his rich experience, right, as a CEO of a large-sized business. Yeah. Then he went on his own, right, and also make a very successful company.
And it's my point is, don't read a book by its cover. Yeah. And I knew that, and yet even in this case, I made a judgment. And now, when you ask who's impressed me the most, he probably has, by the things, not just of what he's created, but the culture of his company. He's one of the most, he's so incredibly intelligent and yet so deeply innovative. Yep. But the culture, all of the people there feel a sense of pride because of not just what they're creating, but the culture, the way they support each other. And to your point, why would he want to spend time in a Vistage group? He said, Lance, are you kidding? That's the very reason. I will make far better decisions if I'm in a community of people who are talking candidly about what is the truth and what are our beliefs. And anyway, yes.
Yeah, when it comes to the point you mentioned that he joined your group, right, as a Vistage member. And
yes.
And what do you think are the key value of a Vistage Chair to these business leaders based on your experience? And you obviously made them aware of the value, right? As a Vistage group can help those entrepreneurs or business leaders, right, to grow personally, to grow on the business front.
If you'll allow me, there is some research that Vistage has conducted. It began a little under 10 years ago, but for many, many years as the organization grew, evaluating in a very specific way what is the value members get. That so often it can be specific. I needed support. I needed clarity. I needed funding. So they did the research and finally was able to aggregate enough statistically significant. There's four areas of value that most often our members talk about. Better leaders making better decisions, achieving better results. Yes, but I'm talking about, and here was the interesting thing for me. I took those 4 areas and surveyed my own members. Because I'd been around Vistage long enough, my members had been around long enough, I tested those, and here's what I found out, and this continued to fascinate me. Mm-hmm. When a Vistage member typically joins a Vistage group, they are seeking value number 1, and it's called business optimization. I want to improve my business. I want to grow quicker. I want to scale. I want a business optimization.
Business optimization.
Value number 2 is I want to grow myself as a leader. And I'm not saying they aren't aligned or similar, but here's the interesting thing. I had my members who had been with me over 3 to 5 years, really, who said that's what I needed to focus on, or that's what is my value to grow as a leader. Said another way, what I realized, Sheldon, is my newer members were focused on business growth. Then they realized after a couple of years, oh, it's me. I need to change. And that became the sort of growth area between, if you will, 5 years, 10 years. Once they'd been a member for many years, now they realized, which is the third area of value, and that was the area of insight. I want to rely on Vistage to show me, if you will, the future. Cryptocurrency, blockchain, solar, whatever the future of business is. And so that's the third area. And then again, when I gave the question, my members who'd been with me over 10 years, and I said, what's the primary area of value you're receiving today? And they would say, Lance, it's the insight into the future. I depend on, right? Number 4, my members who've been with me almost 20 years, and I say, what is the value? And they say, Lance, it's the community. The fact that I get to be with other leaders all committed to saving families, to growing businesses, to changing the world, I want to stay here. Yeah. So the 4 areas of value: business optimization, my own growth as a leader, insight into the future, resources and community, having this group of people. But what I learned, Sheldon, was it tends to evolve over time. So to answer your question, what is the value to the members? It changes based on tenure. It's not a one and done. And that's why I believe many of us as chairs get to stay with members for such a long time, even after they've sold their company or built a holding company or whatever it may be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And then the shared value.
Yes, 100%. Right. Yeah, I would say those 4 things are existing, but they take greater prominence.
Right.
During the tenure.
So shared values, very, very critical. Right.
You bet.
Okay.
You're gonna help me manage time. Yes, you ask the questions you feel are the most relevant. Okay.
I'm in the process of managing time.
Good. And I'll tell you, I have as much time as you want. I feel so grateful. So.
Okay. Yeah. And one of the questions that our friends mentioned, what do you think makes a good CEO? Maybe this is the person who wants to be CEO. What kind of growth advice and a path you could suggest that executives who want to become CEOs?
that one is
you've been working with CEOs for more than 20 years, right?
Just recently, I was interviewed for an article about being a CEO today in the world. And the reason I say that is I mentioned to you that much of my Vistage practice is in Silicon Valley, but I was approached about 10 years ago to be a part of a program through a number of the well-known universities locally, Stanford, for what we call social impact entrepreneurs, people who are trying to create change in the world, but it's geared less on profit and more on particular realities globally. And so between the being a CEO in India, focus on improving child birth rates, to Silicon Valley, who's creating the next artificial intelligence firm.
The next generation technology.
So they asked me to speak, and that was a question that came up: what makes a good CEO, given the diversity of approaches? And I forgive me, I don't do this very often. Normally, I will reference the wisdom of someone else, but this was my own. All right. Yeah. I saw a pattern of the good CEOs, and I'd like to share that with you. And I'm there's more here I need to unpack, but the great CEOs seem to possess three abilities that really have stood out for me. Really have. The first is common but I call it the three V's: vision, voice, velocity.
Okay, three V's.
Three V's. Mm-hmm. The first one, whether we're going through a downturn in the economy, whether we're going through challenges of COVID and the issues there, whether we're struggling with a bear market or a bull market, mm-hmm. whether we're realizing that our blockchain might change the future of business, right. Great CEOs find a way to create a vision through change. Vision through change. They align their people on understanding where we're going and sort of why we're going there and why that destination is important and mm-hmm. why that destination matters. It's fascinating to me, the role that strong vision. Doesn't matter whether it's a competent athlete, mm-hmm. a competent everyone who seems to succeed individually and collectively has vision. And in the world of leading companies, and let's not forget, if people aren't following you, you're not a leader. So, but it's that vision first. Yeah. The second is great leaders create a place where the employees know their voice matters. Mm-hmm. If you think of any relationship, if I don't have a sense that my voice matters to you, Sheldon, or your voice matters to me, we won't have a relationship. And leaders who begin to think that some people have a voice, they matter, and others don't, it doesn't work that way. And I'm not talking about mm-hmm. correct. I'm not talking about consensus necessarily. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do justice to what I'm going to say next, but historically, mm-hmm. I watched my early upbringing in the United States. I would work for companies where CEOs were so caught up with ideas and the way they led the businesses, my voice didn't matter. And then I went to China and I watched the role of a leader in China, what I call had more of a father figure approach or family, and that people's voices were, and that changed me. And I watched it, and I've watched it grow in the United States. But around the globe, I see again and again, if I, as an employee or even a contractor, but I have a sense that my voice matters, and whatever the topic, whether it's COVID, whether it's product, whether it's clients. So great CEOs find a way to create an element where the employees in their companies know their voice matters to the CEO.
And they speak out.
Yes. Yes. And
they
create
encouraged
change.
To speak out, right?
Yes, and prevent us from failure, right? What takes a business out is almost always, quote, we didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Well, I promise you, somebody in that company saw it, but they didn't say it. So I, as a leader, if I create a place where A, I have vision, B, I ensure that my employees have a voice that matters, but the last one is velocity.
Yeah.
You can't be in a place of hesitation. You can't be in a place of pause. You can't be in a place of confusion. You can't be in so I watched with COVID in particular. If a business said we're going to wait to figure it out, no, we have to continue what I call velocity. There's a movement, right? What keeps people healthy? They keep moving. It's no different for a company to be careful of slowing down, relaxing, becoming fearful. So the leader has to create velocity. And I had one person say, "You mean for velocity's sake?" Yes. You got to keep moving, and so those three things, that to me, I've watched. And the last thing I would say, that's where Vistage, the group experience, can help give you insight to your vision, clarity on whether or not you've created a place where people feel valued and heard. And number three, are you moving? And Vistage members do that. So, and if I want to become a CEO, developing those skills, absolutely. To me, they seem critical.
Great. And they finally, people are committed to taking actions. Right.
Yeah, that one. What do they call it? A ticket to entry. That's one of the ones that many people will say that they have to be committed to action. That to me is a given. Okay. I don't. If I say I want to exercise and become better, I'm saying I'm committed to action. No, it's action. It's not. So it's that one. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely. And to me, that's a given. That's if a tree grows, it has roots. That are just the roots. That's the foundation. We use the word quality. Qualities now become a standard. It's just a given. You don't separate those. If you don't create quality, well, you don't have a business anymore. So yes. I would say you're right, though. Vistage members hold each other accountable. But that's, to your point, you have to be taking action. But that's partly what I mean by velocity.
Okay. Velocity. Yes. Wonderful 3V model, right?
Yes.
Your leadership model, Lance leadership model.
It's not my own somehow. It is. I said it myself, but that's one I guarantee you that anybody gets.
Okay,
go ahead, please. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Wonderful.
Yep.
Then Lance, more and more businesses are facing the problems of cross-cultural communication. Right, as you mentioned that now we have global business interacting more frequently than before, and as you are a best practice chair in Silicon Valley, right? You have members, they do business cross-culturally.
Yes.
And then could you share some key elements and ideas of how they, these leaders make cross-cultural communication successful, and based on your observation. And you yourself have conducted trainings for Vistage community globally. Right? You also have your personal experience to share, right?
Well, in the Vistage world, 5 years ago, I personally felt that I wanted to expand our cross-cultural knowledge as a community, and felt like if simply having conferences or sharing wasn't it. So I built created the first ever international chair group, not once, but to keep going, just so that we could understand what it means to be global leaders and developing that. I think to answer your question, the world of cross-cultural communication or intercultural communication, my experience is that, as I mentioned, self-awareness. One of the challenges of self-awareness is what I call sleepiness, as you say, but the inability to see things as they really are. So if I'm raised with a particular belief system or orientation, the one I would use is sort of sometimes in the United States, there's a way to communicate that is what we call direct or indirect communication. Verbal, nonverbal communication, all of these things that I develop where when I'm young, I don't ask the question why. That comes, I ask, but I'm really learning what. But the problem arises when, let's just say, in some countries you stand close when you communicate, in other countries you stand apart. In some countries you communicate with a lot of noise, and some you don't. In some you bow. But in all of those cases and situations, I'm making an evaluation or judgment, but I don't see the truth. I have to recognize that culture at its core isn't strictly individual, it's community. But today it's very broad. We have in a time when we're reevaluating what's a man and what's a woman, when we're reevaluating when companies are fundamentally larger than countries, when we are even reevaluating what does it mean from the standpoint of certain political systems in ways that are changing the world. When I put all of that together, a business, especially as you mentioned, so it has to exist in this very, if you will, complicated, what appears to be getting more complicated, not less. And therefore, what I'm trying to do to build in that cross-cultural awareness or create a venue, the Vistage group creates a space for us to communicate and learn about that in ways that I'm not defensive. Like there's an old adage in the United States that I've never been a fan of, but because sometimes families have difficulty talking about religion or politics, and some say money, and again, that's cultural in the U.S. I don't want my Vistage groups to be confined by that. So I don't have that norm. We have to be a place where we can talk about everything because that's the world we're leading in. And it's become more important than ever. But that takes strength or courage on my side. There's a concept in Vistage. If I, as a chair, create a homogeneous group, let's say all the same culture, all the same race, all the same business, yes, it's a group, but to me, it's not robust. It's not heterogeneous groups, more diverse, create more ideas, more solutions. That's more of the world we're living in. It's harder as the chair of that kind of a business, but I find that is more fulfilling, more realistic. So to the problems of cross-cultural communication are simply, in fact, some of the backlash that we're seeing in the United States are those people who are resisting that broader perspective, that it's safer or easier to live in a more narrow view of the world. And if we can keep that, so you and I both know that if I'm going to develop leaders, I have to create leaders that can exist globally. Right. And personally, I'm excited to say I see some of the generations much younger than I doing that more effectively, in my humble opinion.
Okay.
So I hope that answered it. I could quite literally talk to you about that for the next 5 days because I'm very passionate about real learning. For me comes when I investigate not the things I know, but the things I don't know.
Okay.
That's growth. Yes.
Okay. Well, you have amazing experience of forming a Vistage international chair group, right? And which is I think quite extraordinary, right? And you have made things happen, and based on your working experience,
Yeah.
what do you think is the most important factor for a global success of Vistage, model or Vistage leadership, model? And is there anything that like a cultural difference will affect the global development of Vistage business model or its leadership development model?
Yeah, I don't. I think the word I want to use first, Sheldon, is what I call superordinate goal.
Okay.
There's a belief in the world of change that if I take two individuals who are fundamentally opposed, be it politically, be it religiously, be it spiritually, be it economically, whatever, and I create a reason that transcends that for both of them for their survival.
Mm-hmm.
If they no longer can debate, so to speak, but they have to work together to solve a superordinate goal, something that's bigger than the two of them, all of a sudden they come together instead of staying divided. So I believe if Vistage creates a superordinate goal, what might that be? Again, sharing this idea of what a definition of global leader, no, but becoming the best version of myself. So what my experience, there's an element of creating an awareness around learning economic systems that are dependent on, back to what I said earlier, VVV, that we need each other more than we isolate. I mean, a Vistage group is about coming together. So okay. The second one, we know that Vistage groups, and back to what you asked globally, vulnerability or transparency. Mm-hmm. If we limit ourselves, that doesn't work. But that's the same case with human beings. Trust is built when we even the paradox. I can be in a room with somebody I don't agree with, but I respect. Mm-hmm. So what I believe sort of the future of Vistage is creating an awareness that what we're working on as chairs and members is what I call that superordinate goal. Ultimately, we have all the resources we need for everyone in this planet to live in health, wealth, right? Joy, peace. It all exists if we can find a way to overcome our differences or overcome those things that make us afraid, overcome our wounds. Back to what I said about generational. Mm-hmm. So much of that friction in a family, right, exists between countries and cultures. We're seeing it now between certain topics, U.S. and China, what we understand traditionally or legacy. So if a community of business owners, in particular, small to medium-sized businesses, can come together to create bonds of change, typically under that element of transparency, vulnerability, and vision, I what do they say? The fundamental, don't ever doubt that real change can be had in the world, by a few, because that's what always happened. That's my hope, that this global community of Vistage chairs committed to supporting the entrepreneurs who want to change the world in a better way, and are open to different views, opinions, and beliefs, and creating their own self-awareness, to play a part in world peace and world growth, is what has been the key for me. But that never can come from what I have the answer. No, I'm simply a part of a community that will create those answers. on behalf of all of us because we have it within us. As a community, if we can stay open, it's not my way, it's our way. You know, at its core, Vistage was never me, it's always we.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lance. You mentioned the word super organic goal, right?
Superordinate. It's a, you know, some have said, will climate change bring us together? And all I know is that in the world of change, if there's something that unites us, then it can. Within the Vistage Chair community, that's about creating leaders that are committed to creating a better world.
Right.
But how do you define better? That's we've got to come together around that, and we're still working on that. Absolutely.
Right. We can further the discussions. Right.
Yes.
Well, it's about the time we come to the final point in terms of time process. Well, another one good question is that as one of the best known chairs at Vistage, Lance, you have experienced, more than 20 years chairing, right? And you obviously have successfully admitted many members. How do you see, or how do you convince a prospect, right, the value of, Vistage Private Business Advisory Board to those CEOs?
So you're asking the question relative to a new potential member,
right,
who has yet to experience a Vistage meeting,
right,
and they are questioning the value, as they should, prior to even stepping into the room to experience it. Correct?
Right.
Thank you for asking. That is one of my favorite challenges, if you will, or question, and one that I would say early on as a chair I struggled with, and today I no longer struggle as much, in part because I don't tell them the value, they tell me the value.
Okay.
So how that is done is the most important. So in every situation where it doesn't matter the context, let's say I meet a new candidate through a referral from somebody such as yourself, or through social media, the communication through internet in some way where somebody heard about me or Vistage or whatever. Or I'm sitting next to them on the airplane and I ask them what they do and they ask what I do. And in all of those cases, I've initiated a connection with somebody who at some point will ask the question about value. And to answer the question, I say every single time, if you will agree to a 90-minute meeting with me,
mm-hmm.
not an hour, not 30 minutes, a full 90 minutes. Yeah. In that time frame, mm-hmm. I will ask you a series of questions in which you will be able to identify, uncover, if you will, clarity around the significant and specific area of value for you. It could be around all the things we mentioned. I want to grow my company. I want to change my company. I want to pass my business on to the next generation. They will identify their area of value within Vistage if they agree to a confidential setting for 90 minutes and I follow a particular process of uncovering with very specific questions to help them identify the value. And in the context of that meeting, I'll also create an initial experience of the group to help them see themselves in the group. So said another way, I will be able to determine whether or not they and the company are qualified for membership, and they will be able to determine whether or not they will get significant value. After that meeting, we will now have an alignment. Now, for me, I call it their dream because I will extend it. What ultimately are they hoping will be created in their life? And the reason I've stayed with Vistage and not gone out on my own, this idea of creating a worldwide organization has offered me whatever opportunity solution. If somebody wants to grow a philanthropic organization or change their business or go into technology, it doesn't matter. I now have a platform to help that individual create the world they really have dreamed of creating, including their family, including their skill set. So to answer your question, how they create the value only within the context of a 90-minute meeting that has been well crafted for them and us together to identify that value. Mm-hmm. When I shortchange that in some way or try to, no, that doesn't happen. So that's why it has to be confidential. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, we're creating trust. They will experience that trust that I mentioned, that care, that in this program, we're all going to help each other. They experience that in the context of that meeting with me.
Okay.
And then it's simply, validated in the meeting. Did that, do you feel like that answered the question as you asked it?
Oh, sure. Okay. And you ask the prospect, right, to identify the areas that you and the group could add value. You let them, right, define the area over the 90 minutes.
And the level of impact, not just the broad area. What will be the specific economic value, emotional value, time value, right? Time is our most precious commodity. So I want Vistage to change their experience of their time, how they work more. And then lastly is certainly that, the hours they're spending, the emotions but their relationship. It's interesting. I learned from a colleague. He said, Lance, your life is defined by the conversations you're having or the quality of your conversations. Right. Your life is defined. All you have are conversations are either very good conversations or not very good. So that's what I mean by relationships. Ultimately, they want the relationships in their life or the conversations to be meaningful and impactful and fruitful. So it's just not about creating money or creating success. It's really creating significance or legacy, as we mentioned earlier. So taking pride in the life I led.
Okay, thank you, Lance. Very
absolutely.
That was a valuable sharing, but especially to chairs in China. Okay, finally, Lance, you've been an active participant in the development of Vistage Chairs in China. You've been to China for many times and conducted training programs for new chairs, and you are in constant communication with our chairs in China. And based on the experience of, your the years that you work with us, how do you see the future challenges and the development of our Vistage, CEO leadership model in China, and from your perspective, right? How you see the challenges ahead, and what should we do better to make things happen, to grow, right? The Vistage CEO development model in China.
I'm going to answer this question, if I could, Sheldon, from what I would call more my heart than my head. Okay.
Always.
Okay. And the reason I say that, I believe one of the things that struck me the most about my time in China, and in 1985, there was such a what I would call the cusp. The doors had just opened in many ways. I mean, it was a new beginning. And then when I came back to China, whatever, 5 years later, the urgency for growth and scale was I just never seen anything like it. You know, I mean, one of the things I love about sort of, if you'll allow me, in the United States, there's an element that I call, in the cross-cultural word, the hyphenated American. And people are, Lance, what do you mean the hyphenated? So many people in the United States have a various background, ethnically, culturally. So they'll refer to themselves as an Italian American, an Irish American, Jewish American, Chinese American, Asian American, gay American. I mean, it's absolutely, and I often wondered, what is that about? Why do people not just say, I'm an American? What are the why? And here's what's interesting. Again, it's a country with so many strengths and so many areas for improvement, just like all of us. But it's a country that prides itself, to a certain extent, on history, struggles with what it means by capitalism and democracy and the experiment, and taking all of that apart. But what most people, when they say hyphenated, I have a sort of a historical background that I don't want to lose. I may know very little about my name, French Basque or French, about the people within Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain, and I'm fourth generation in the U.S. But I want to have a sense of history, but I also want to connect with the American idea that there is no such thing as no. If I say to an American, you don't have enough money, I'll find it. If I say, you don't have the resource, we'll get it. The Americans obsessed with this idea of possibility and opportunity that way. Well, I watched China emerge in the same kind of frenetic, but Chinese working 3 jobs and moving so fast and so hard. Anyway, I've watched this evolution of the future of China and its profound presence in the global stage and all of that. But here's the answer to your question, at least for me.
Okay.
It will never, ever be about me. It will again be about we. Okay. If the chair community competes with one another or sees themselves as becoming, one of the things I like in the U.S. is we don't take regions, right? I'm Lance and I own Silicon Valley, and Susan has, Northern California. And we don't do that. We believe that there's enough opportunity. We will never, ever, ever sort of achieve market dominance in such a way. Mm-hmm. So as long as the chair community understands how to come together as we, mm-hmm. how to support each other, being the best chairs in China, in a world that is evolving globally, right? The connection between, just like the U.S., China, and so many other regions within the world. I'm absolutely fascinated by the future if And I've never been more excited, and you know that under the sort of current generation of chairs who now have a foundation, a foothold. They don't see themselves as new chairs. They see themselves as old chairs. And that means they have the foundation that others can build on. Mm-hmm. You know, becoming a great chair doesn't happen in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It happens after that. And I don't like the fact that but once that foundation is in place, there's a sense of community, a sense of foundation. Mm-hmm. There's a metaphor in the U.S. Around a tree, and ultimately a tree is not an individual. It sees itself as part of a community. Yep. It's never isolated. It's always in community. And we may see it. No, it works together in support of other trees. And in essence, what is creating roots and wings. Mm-hmm. So as long as the chair community does not compete against each other or ever view that's what the Vistage Chair, it's about working together to promote CEOs, business owners, small to medium-sized companies committed to creating transparency and trust and change in the world. The opportunities are endless. If we see ourselves somehow and not a community, but a platform for me, that from my belief, that's the future of Vistage China. And the other thing which is interesting, the reality that there are other organizations that are competitors. It's so the opportunity for leaders to simply become more self-aware. I don't see competition. I see other support. If those organizations are promoting leaders becoming more self-aware, then we're in the same game. Yeah. So, we have, quote, the competitive peer board of it. That for me is not the case. That's simply a challenge for us to become better chairs, create better, more powerful groups, creating more for each other. So I believe the future is built on a foundation of old chairs. They're not old, but they really know what Vistage is all about. They really know what true peer board development of trust, transparency, and change is all about. The future's great. We don't compete. We support each other to become the best chairs we can be. We are servant leaders at its core. I'm excited by the future and honored that I had a team. I had a small party. Yep.
Okay. So you definitely have played a quite important part in this process of we chairs in China build our community. Last night we had a meeting talking about how to write influential articles. Okay. Well, we are very. I want to say quite amazing, storytelling and the experience sharing. Thank you again, Les. You are really true. The leaders of cheers. Okay. Finally, it's about the time we finish our conversation.
Yes.
Want to thank you, Les, again, for your contribution of your ideas, your experience, and your perspective. Okay, we enjoy it quite a lot. And I also want to thank our friends in the chat room. Thanks for your participation. And thanks to our team for your helping make things happen. The dialogue today we have, taped. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And finally,
may I add one last comment? As you were just speaking, I realized so much of my work as a chair has been face-to-face or like we're meeting Zoom. You know what? This particular conversation, Sheldon challenged me. I need to post this on my social media to promote Vistage China. So
okay.
All
Thank you,
right. So
Lance.
every time
Okay.
I learn. So I'm
Okay.
honored. I'm honored. And lastly, I would just say a personal thank you, Sheldon. You have showed up in my life personally. I can reference many times when you've made me feel valued. And so I will do all I can to support you because of what you've done to support me and our work together. So it's a privilege to be part of this with you. Thank you for the honor of speaking and our future together that continues because of your efforts, my friend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lance, again, and I'm really looking forward to further, discussing with you. But some of other time we can find to further our conversation. Okay, today we have come to the point that we need to finish this session. And thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Lance. We'll see you next
Cheers.
time.
Okay.
Okay.